You know, in this life, we often see this happen. There's a relationship, and one person in the relationship is putting effort into it, and the other one isn't. Being a counselor and having counseled enough couples in marriage, I can say that many times the struggle in the relationship is that exact thing, that one person puts more into the other. Now, don't misunderstand this. The expectation of the partner that is putting in less effort isn't any less than the other one. And so sometimes it's even, they have a greater expectation than the one that is putting the effort in. They want freebies without having to do what is necessary to do. It's difficult to rationalize this unless you realize that in our society, like none other before us, we are so advanced that we want something for nothing. We want freebies in our life. But there's always an expectation from that person without having to put the effort in. There's a fella at the airport, and he was in the north terminal, and he wanted to go to the main terminal, and to do that you had to get a shuttle. And so he called the shuttle, and he said he was ready to go. So the shuttle shows up, and as he's about to get onto the shuttle, this man runs up with his younger child, and he says, "Is there any free seats on this? Or is there any seats, like open seats on this shuttle?" And the shuttle driver said, "Yes, there is." And that wasn't good enough for him. Then he said, "You know, since you're going there anyways, why don't we just ride along for free?" And the shuttle driver said, "No, that's not how it works," right? And they had a standoff a little bit. And finally, she just looked at the other guy and she said, "Are you ready to go?" And he said, "Yeah," and they took the way they went, right? But that's how the people in Jesus' day were. Think about this. He fed 5,000, right? The next time that comes around, they're waiting for the food again. They missed the miracle, or they missed the point of the miracle, but they want the miracle, right? They want the miracle, but they do not want the rest that goes along with having that miracle. And so they want things to kind of be their way. Now, it's true of money as well. You know, why do you think people buy lottery tickets? It's not because they want to give the lottery money. It's not that they want to donate some money to wherever half of the lottery money is donated to. They want to win the millions and millions of dollars, and they want it to be a freebie. That's what they want. And so it's kind of like the guy that was sitting at the table and he was starving. He's complaining about starving, and he had a plate of food in front of him. And the person said to him, "Why don't you take a bite of that food that's in front of you?" He was too lazy to lift up the fork to his mouth. I mean, that's how people are. The crowds that followed Jesus were like that, and today we have people that are just like that. You know, we're the only society that I know of, and probably not, maybe not my generation yet, but the generation that followed me had an expectation. They had an expectation that everything that their parents had and that they had worked so hard for and finally achieved through their life, you know, the house and the car, and the kids grew up in the house and everything. Well, those kids expect to go out at 20 years old and have all those things. It should just fall into their lap. And they shouldn't have to do much to make that happen. And so that's how our society is. That's the attitude in the world. Is it any wonder why so many people that claim to be Christians are struggling? Because that same thing has crept into Christianity. Look at the Red Sea. Moses, in Exodus 12, 33 to 42, he leads the people out of Egypt, and they're leaving slavery, and that should be one of the most highs that you could possibly be on in this life. And they're listening to God, and God's leading them. Well, they wind up by the shore of the Red Sea. And they got a mountain standing on each side of them. And they're there, and all of a sudden they look, and off in the distance, they see this big cloud of dust. And here comes the Pharaoh and his army. And they get all over Moses, and they berate Moses because he led them out there. Weren't there enough graves in Egypt that you lead us out here to die in the wilderness and all of these things? And so they're coming along, and Moses stands up and he says, calm, calm. Wait a minute here. Hold on, guys. And so he says in Exodus 14, he says, stand firm. And he said, today you're going to see the salvation of the Lord. Well, what happened? Oh yeah, the Red Sea parted. They walked across on dry land. And the Egyptians, as foolish as they were, the army, they thought, we can do that too. And they got about to the middle, and whew, there came the water. And they all drowned. And people say today, wow, I want that. I want a miracle like that. When people are struggling, when they're sick, when something doesn't go the way they want it, something tragic happens, they haven't been living for God at all in their life. And all of a sudden, they want that miracle. And as soon as, if something happens that's fixed up, they go, great, now I'm going to go on living the rest of my life the way I want to. Think about that. My mom said, come pray for me, because she was going in for an operation with cancer. And she said, come pray for me. You're closer to God than I am. And she wanted to know more about God. And then she had the operation, and she didn't want to know anything about God anymore all of a sudden. She was good and healthy, right? It's sad. Look at Jericho. They go to Jericho. They're going into the promised land 40 years later. And they cross the Jordan, and they come up to the city of Jericho. And God says to Moses, he says, tell the people what they got to do. And this is what they got to do. And so Moses says, guys, you're going to be quiet, and you're going to march around that city one time for 6 days. Now you think about the people of Israel doing that, right? So they go around that city, and I'm told it was probably about a 3/4 of an hour march, maybe an hour march. So they go around that city, and they go back to camp. Next day they get up. Oh yeah, we got to go around the city. Around the city, they do that 6 days. On the 7th day, you're going to walk around there 7 times. And then the priests are going to blow the trumpet. And voila, down come the walls. Oh, the people had to give a shout. And down came the walls. I got to get my story straight. And people go, wow, that's just amazing. But when God says, this is what you got to do, this is what you got to do today, people say, I don't want to do that one. I might do this one. I'm going to shortcut this one. No, why 6 days and then the 7th day 7 times? Why not just walk around it once and voila, it's done? And they want to change everything up because they want to do it their way. Think about Paul on the road to Damascus. He's persecuting the church, and he's got the power of the leadership of the Jews behind him, and he's going, and man, they're going to go in jail, and they're going to be, some of them probably stoned, and all of these things. And so Paul's walking along the road to Damascus, and Jesus comes to visit him in a bright light. And the people around him were like, whoa, what's going on here? And Paul's talking to Jesus. Now, I'm not sure that Paul would have turned if it wasn't for Jesus himself doing that. But that's just me. But Paul turned because Paul had a sincere heart for God. Okay? Now, people tell me, and I've had these things said to me, just so you know, Oh, I was laying in bed one night and a bright light shone on my chest, and I know it was Jesus came to me. There's probably a car light that went by on the street. I don't know, but something happened. They say this, and it's like, huh? And then, or people will say, I was standing in the shower and God came to me and visited me. And they want this miracle to happen, right? But why did it happen to Paul? Because God had a specific mission for him, one. Another thing, Paul had a sincere heart for God. But these people are just living their life, but they want that miracle, and then they feel good, and then they still go back to living their Christian life, and I say that very loosely, the way they want to live it. Think about that. And so people do these things, and they want these things, and they profess these things, but they don't really want to walk as a child of God according to what God said you do. And it works the same with the blessings. People always want blessings. Have you noticed that? Everybody wants to be blessed, and I can't blame them. I mean, wanting a blessing from God's a good thing. I mean, God can bless you well, right? But you think of Job, and I'm going to use Job again, but I don't know who wouldn't want a blessing from God. I just don't know anybody that wouldn't want that. Want a blessing from God? Yeah, of course. That'd be a wonderful thing. But I still want to live my life the way I want to live it. You see, the question is not, do you have faith in God? Or if you like a blessing from God. It's about, are you living for God? Because the rest of it is taken care of if that's the case. And so you ask someone today, would you like to be like Job? And they think about that for a minute. And if you read the very first part of Job, just the first part of the passage, you realize that would be cool. He was richer than anybody in this. Man, yeah. I'd even be Bill Gates. That'd be awesome. But then you read a little further, and oh man, did he go through some trials. It was awful. And it wasn't God doing it. God allowed it, but it was Satan that was doing it. And so we don't want those things. The people don't want those struggles. They don't want to have to go through those things. And so people start to hesitate. What happened to Job is this. He wasn't always sitting pretty. In fact, I believe Job is the one that says, God gives and God takes away. And so Job understood this. So Satan comes to God and he says, I'm going to get your guy. God says, give it your best shot, basically. And so he goes and the whole thing backfires on him. But why? Because he was living his life for God, because he trusted in God, because he had faith in God. And so that couldn't be destroyed by Satan. If we didn't have faith in God, it'd be easy. It'd be no big deal. And so it backfired on Satan. And people read about that event in Job. They say, well, I sure want to, I don't want to go through those things, but I would sure like to have the blessing. And then they get to the end of Job and they read there, and these people that want something for nothing read that and they say, whoa, God blessed Job 2 times what he had to begin with. He was already the richest guy in the world there, and he gave him twice as much back. And I'm guessing he blessed him with family too, but he blesses Job. And everybody says, yeah, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. And then after he's blessed, so people want these things, but they don't want to stand on God. They don't necessarily believe on him until they're in trouble and all of those kinds of things. So there's a problem going on, right? God's purpose for blessings and miracles are for his glory and honor. You know, what Job did, well, we'll start with the Red Sea. The first thing is the blessings of Job, the Red Sea, the miracle of Jericho, Paul on the road to Damascus, all have one thing in common. They were all about living for God, and they were all faithful to God. That's very important to see. At the Red Sea, the people feared Egypt coming, but they acted on the instructions of God. And because they acted on them and were obedient to him, they got through the sea, and Egypt didn't. Jericho and Paul, they were doing what God's will was. They listened to what God told them to do. They were doing that. They trusted in God. And so they went one day, once around. Second day, once around 6 times. The 7th time, 7 times. Trumpet blows, the people shout. Bam, the walls are down. They did what God asked them to do. They were striving, not always doing well at it, but they were striving to live for God. With Job, it was about staying obedient and true to God, even through all of the sufferings. Because Job knew that he was God, whether Job himself was suffering or had everything. It didn't matter. He was still God. And if we have that heart and that faith and that trust, that's what we need to have. That's important. The Jews left Egypt, putting their faith and trust in God. Job put all his faith and trust in God. So did the Jews all around Jericho, and Paul did. And what happened? Now think about this. Centurion comes to Jesus in Luke chapter 7. And the centurion has a slave that he wants healed. And he comes and he has a conversation with Jesus. And Jesus says, well, I do this and that and those kinds of things. And he says, yeah, I'm a guy just like that. I tell my slave, go do this, he does it. I tell my slave, go here, and he goes there. And all of these things. And what he's telling them in that conversation, the gist of the conversation was that, Jesus, I know you, and you are a person that you say it, and it gets done. And I want my slave healed. I really do. This guy's special to me, right? And so Jesus says it's done. But Jesus says something else that's very, very important. He says, not even in Israel have I found such faith. What was the cause? What was all of this about? It's about faith in God. It's about obedience to God. It's about walking with God and doing what God wants to his glory and honor. So what about God's people today? What kind of faith do we have? People today have ideas of how things should be done, and they are willing to do that. They say what they're willing to do and what God needs to do for their situation, instead of asking God what needs to be done. And so they're trying to do it their way instead of God's way. And that has been a huge problem. There's something very important this morning I want to tell you. That is not how life with God and how life in Christ Jesus works. It doesn't go that way. That's just not the way it is. I want you to hear something. I took this excerpt out of Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way. I want you to hear this. It says, and now the end is near. I faced the final curtain. My friend, I will say it clear. I will state my case of which I'm certain. I lived my life that's full. I've traveled each and every highway. And more, much more than this, I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do. I saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the way, each careful step along the byway, and much more than this, I did it my way. And I remember that song, and I remember when I was growing up, people would play that song, and they would go, this is a life changer. This is what I want. That's a great motto for my life. I'm going to do that. That's the way I want to live life. And they would buy into this thing. And they would just, and I think sometimes as Christians, we still try to do that. We still try to do it my way. And it's not about my way. It's about his way. And so that leaves us with a dilemma. It leaves us with a choice of which road we are going to travel in life. You see, in one sense, it's up to us. In another sense, it's not up to us at all. What's up to us is to choose the road that we're going to walk. But God has already determined the consequences and results of either choice. And we can't change that. And that's sometimes what people want to change. And that carries over into Christianity. You know, you would think that would make our choice easier, but it doesn't seem to make our choice easier. Like Frank Sinatra sang, I did it my way. And sadly, that is the way people want to do it. That song was so popular, and so many people bought into that motto for their life. And it carries over, and I say, quote, into Christian lives, because not everybody's, but it carries over into people's view of God and Christ. And they view that we should be able to do it our way. That's why people say, you know, you believe what you want to believe, I believe what I want to believe. And they forget that here's what we need to believe. And so they're saying, however you want to live your life, you just live your life that way. If you're in an emergency and you want to call on God for something, call on him, get it fixed. But then just live your life the way you want to live. And God's going to come along with a stamp, and he's going to go, I approve. Well, folks, that is not going to happen. That just cannot happen. So we have a choice. I did it my way. That's up to you to make that choice if you want to. But I can tell you there's a better choice. And the better choice is I want to do it God's way. God says, you know, don't do that. You've tried that all your life to go the way you want to go, and it has never worked out. What I want you to do is do it my way. The way this works, if you want that, is you have to first of all believe in me. You have to trust me. You have to put faith in me. In fact, believing and trusting in God is exactly what faith is. Now, faith in me means that you will do the things my way. You will do them according to my will. And it means you will abide in my word. And all of these things will bring me glory and honor. And you will worship me as I want you to worship me in spirit and in truth. And you don't decide what pleases me. I've already instructed you on what pleases me. And that is how you receive my blessings, my rewards, and my promises. You live my way, you live your life for me, you bring me glory and honor, and you are not able to comprehend the blessings and rewards that you will have, and the promises I've already given you that are stored up for you in heaven. I can bless you like Job, but remember, it isn't about how you want to be blessed, but it's how I want to bless you. And in my books, I think that's way better, because I'm so limited in how I can think he can bless me, and he's not limited to how much he can bless me. I can remove your mountains in your life. I can build them up in your life just exactly as much as you need to have a strong faith in me. And I won't give you something for nothing, but I definitely will give you something for something. This is, oh, sorry. See if any of you remember this. Oh, you don't get something for nothing. You don't get freedom for free. You won't get wise with the sleep still in your eyes, no matter what your dreams might be. 1976, a song that Rush sang, the band Rush. And it's true. That's exactly true. Something for nothing is not how God works. But if you want something for something from God this morning, you can come and let us know how we can help you while we stand and sing.
I once was lost.